It is indeed about productivity and happiness. So these are the two words I put on top. And this is based on a long experience I have trying to become more productive in my own life, but also studying it with a lot of colleagues that I work with. So today I'm first going to introduce myself quickly so you know my context, my background, and then I'll talk about the problem we're trying to solve in this presentation. First of all, who am I? Currently, I'm working as a developer advocate for a platform called Athena, which is a large trading platform developed at JP Chase. It's basically, imagine a big database, programming model for modeling instruments, we call them. So those are things like stocks and bonds and derivatives. Be able to price them, create a portfolio of them, and basically manage markets. That's what this platform does. It's a humongous environment, so we care a lot about the productivity of developers in this environment as well. And that is the main interest of myself. I jokingly call myself Chief Happiness Officer on this project because I've learned, and I'll give away this conclusion way at the start of this presentation, is that productivity is a myth. I've worked on this topic at both, I think IBM, Bank of America, Google, Uber, and we try to measure productivity, and it's really difficult. So these days I just go for happiness. I think if I make the developer happy, then they automatically will become productive. And that's a lot easier to achieve because you can ask them, like, are you happy? If you ask them, are you productive? That's a lot more difficult question. So like I said, I worry about how we develop software. So this goes as far as taking pictures of my own desktop and labeling things and explaining things. Ironically, this is the most popular blog post I've ever written. So if you want to come famous in blogs, just take pictures of your desk. Like that's. I have a lot of insightful blogs that don't get as read as much. So this is people care about their productivity. That's what I learned. When I learn myself, I constantly want to grow. This is one of the motivations that I have in my career, but also in life. And I found that the best way to learn something is to actually do it. There's a Dutch saying, aldoende leert me. And so that means like while you're doing, you're actually learning. And that is the best way of trying to gather some new information, is to either teach about it or to write about it. And both things are very similar, of course. And the book is great because typically you sign up with an editor and you say like, so they ask you like, oh, can you publish it in November? And you say, yeah, sure. So now you have a deadline, you have a number of days, you can calculate how many pages per day you have to write. So those things are really helpful for structuring your learning process. So the book that Josh mentioned, Communication for Engineer, that's the most recent one. I wrote that book because I'm not an expert in communication. I'm an engineer, I'm a software developer, but I'm not really an expert in communication. So I thought like, I want to become one. So how do you become an expert in something? You write a book about it. So that's basically my background. Working-wise, I've worked at half of my life at tech companies and the other half at finance companies. So these are big investment banks like Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, and now JP Morgan. On the technical side, it's companies like IBM, Google, and Uber. And you would think that that's two different worlds, but essentially they're all trying to solve the same problem, which is to compute at scale, do data storage at scale, and try to analyze and make sense out of this information. And whether that's Google trying to index the world, whether that's Uber trying to match up drivers with customers, or whether that's a bank trying to sell bonds on the market. There's not such like a large difference. And the kind of emphasis that we place on development culture and productivity and happiness transcend beyond that barrier, I think. A little fun thing about myself is I like bicycling. So This is also a Dutch thing, so it was part of my identity when I lived in the US for about half my life. And the nice thing about biking is that it allows you to move slow. So there's a saying like to go somewhere fast, move slowly. And my recent trip was last week to London. So I visited JP Morgan, where I just started. And I went all the way by bicycle from Amsterdam. I took a train halfway, but I actually biked to the train in Amsterdam. And then in London, I did all transportation with bikes as well. And I was surprised how well this worked in London. I've been to London numerous times, also with my bike. And recently there is an insurgence of bicycle paths throughout the whole city. And especially if you work in Canary Wharf and you want to go to the city, there's a really nice bicycle connection right now. So this comes back to productivity, right? Like I want to be able to drive my bike, but if there's no infrastructure, then it's impossible. I don't have the autonomy to actually make my personal decision on how I want to travel. And this comes back in how companies are structured as well. Okay, so that's me. Today, I want to talk about three things. So I call them 3, 4, 5. So 3 premises. So these are sort of contextual anchors for the discussion that we'll have. And they also introduce the problem that I want to discuss. Then I will talk about 4 different frameworks that I collected and developed in order to make us all more productive. So to solve the problem, I will talk about in the premises. And then I will give you 5 concrete examples of software development environments where all these things come back. So I'll put the frameworks into practice. So let's try that. So first premise is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you read the fine print at the bottom, if you can actually read that on your phone, I'm not sure if the font is big enough, but it says this was developed in 1943 through 1987. So it took Maslow 45 years almost to refine this theory that he had on what motivates people. So this is a study in motivational theory in psychology. And Maslow said, like, there's an end goal that we have, like the top of the pyramid, we want to reach there. But if our basic needs, like safety needs, like personal safety, your health, your job, a roof over your head, if that's not met, you cannot worry about the next level. So basic level, we assume that is covered. And in our profession, our software developers, we tend to be overpaid relative to other people. So the basic needs are nicely covered by most companies, at least. So we worry more as software developers about the psychological level. This is about a sense of belonging, camaraderie. This is why we have team exercises. This is why we do stand-up, so we feel part of a team. It also is important to develop our psychological needs in the area of esteem. So this is recognition. This is a title. This is why we go for promotion. So going from software developer 1 to software developer 2 to 3 to senior to staff engineer to distinguished engineer. This is all recognition of our expertise. And with that also comes, and recognition and status comes more money, of course. And often people use that as a shadow proxy metric for their real success. So you buy an expensive car because that gives you the status of you achieved something in life, right? This is how we measure and assign meaning to our journey that we're all on in our lives. But really, what Maslow indicated is that we want to reach the top level, which is fulfillment. So on a personal level, we want to be able to develop our absolute potential. This is like become the best we can become. To give us enough time to think about creativity. So you need to cover all these other parts below this. But you need to have enough respect from others in order for giving you enough time to actually study your meaning in life. So this is the original diagram that Maslow made in 43, whatever. So this is timeless, right? Has nothing to do with the times we live in today. He didn't know about Corona, but Corona has a lot of impact on this as part as well, right? So do we have a sense of belonging? I started with a new company like 4 weeks ago, and we're in the middle of Corona. I visited the company last week, but there was nobody there. So do I feel part of this company? Not yet, right? Not in the same way that I felt part of this company in other parts of my career, where I had a real onboarding experience. For Google, I've traveled to Mountain View. There were on like 150 people in a team together. We were all onboarding on the same week. We got like a really streamlined onboarding experience. So this is really hard to achieve in an environment where we don't meet each other as often. So these are all things that we as individuals struggle with, but also as leaders. And everybody's a leader, right? Like you can't just look at your manager and the CEO of the company to fix all these things. This is something we do together. This is, we'll talk about that later, about autonomy and how everybody can be a leader. So in the more recent times, Maslow took another study at the top period and the top part of the pyramid. And he refined fulfillment into 4 different parts, like cognitive needs, aesthetic needs, all the way up to transcendence. I won't go into that much detail, but the idea here is that this is what drives us as individuals. So we need to, from time to time, take some stock and see, like, are we focusing on the right thing? Are we already in the top element of the pyramid? Maybe contributing to open source gives us some of that morality part or the play part that we can't do at work. So side projects are a really good idea for people to start developing very early in the career. And it also doesn't mean that in the start of your career, you cannot think about growth, right? Or you cannot think about your reaching your potential. This is something you have to constantly think about. These are not artificial barriers in this pyramid that you can't go to the next level unless you've finished all the other ones. That's another point. All right, so that's one of the background things. And then I added happiness. So this is not officially in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I mentioned earlier that productivity is hard to measure. So if we go for productivity, think about happiness. If you're not happy at work, think about, why am I not happy? Like, what causes me to be unhappy? Is it environmental? Is it tools? Is this like the meaning of life? All these things, you have to constantly look at your emotions, talk about them to yourself, maybe with other people, and try and achieve happiness in work. So that was the first one. So this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That started in 1944. This one is in 1977. So we're getting closer to today. And this was basically an online game that was started by 2 authors of a book called Peopleware. So there's software, hardware, and peopleware. So they're worried about like what makes people productive. So this is the whole premise of the book. Like, how can we make productive individuals? And how can we make productive teams, which is also the theme of this presentation here that I want to talk about. And they looked at the winners of these games over years. So they had a lot of data that they had to analyze. And they thought like, well, the winners are always teams with a lot of experience, of course, right? They have done this for 12, 20 years, and this is how they became really good at this. So this is an impact, but they didn't find a correlation between experience and being able to win at this contest. Also, the choice of language, and the languages were, of course, limited in the 1970s. So we're talking about different choices than today. But it didn't really matter what language you chose, except for assembler. Like, assembler really hurted your productivity, and that makes sense, of course, right? It's a very low level programming language with very few abstractions. So you have to write all the abstractions. So the more abstractions you have, you can use, then the more productive you will be. But what they did find was the environmental factors were really the deciding point for the productivity of a team working on this particular contest. So these were all team assignments. And they figured out that things like, can you work in a quiet environment? Can you work in a private environment? Or are you sitting on a big floor where everybody's watching what you're doing? Can you turn off distractions? So remember, this is 1977, so there's nothing new in the kind of problems that we're facing today. It turned out that the fewer distractions you have, the more you can concentrate on your work, the more productive you are. So that's an interesting background. I think we have an opportunity with COVID, with working at home more often than we did before, is that even if we're working in a company where we work in big floors where there's a lot of distraction, like I've worked in this environment. I've worked in places where I had a personal office, like at IBM Research and at OTI, which is a subsidiary of IBM, where we worked on tools like Eclipse and Java virtual machines. We all had private offices or sometimes shared with another individual that we really liked, but there's no like all the time distractions that you get like on a big floor like I had at Google or at Uber or the investment banks where I worked at. So now with COVID, you work at home, you have control over your environment, and you can actually more easily disable your phone, right? You can turn off these distractions. You can turn off Slack if you really want to focus. So at Google, I was involved in a project called Tempo, where we tried to measure the productivity of developers. Like we were very interested in making Google engineers more productive. So we started off like any good science project, right? You measure. So you want to measure as much as you can. So you want to figure out, like, can you put quantitative information around productivity? So we started measuring like how often people context switches in their environment, like how long they were coding. So we found out interesting numbers. So one of the things that we found out was that engineers only spend about 30% of the time at Google, that is, in actually coding time. So this is inside the editor, typing code and like running things. Like this is really what we would call as engineers or as software developers coding. So it's only 30% of the time. The rest of the time, we just talk about our coding, right, with other people. So we go in and we go to meetings and we have discussions about what we should work on next. We get a lot of information. So there's a lot of overhead communication level wise that defines how productive we can be in that 30% of our time. So that was one finding. But the other finding is, what was a little bit more surprising is that we asked people, we had a button that says like, are you happy? So this is like between 1 and 5. And we randomly asked them that, like, while we were measuring their activity, from time to time, we popped up this thing, are you happy? And this was all to drive machine learning process. So we could like correlate certain behaviors to happiness. Like, we also tried camera recognition. So we just set your camera on all the time. And if you look like oh my God, it's like, what is happening? We could correlate happiness as well, right? You can do sentiment analysis on videos. But that was a bit invasive, so people didn't really like that part so much, to be videotaped all the time. So there's a fine line between like systems helping you understand how you behave and how to get better, and creepiness, right? So this is like videotaping everybody all day was like, people found a little bit too creepy. What we did find out was that happiness was correlated with people being able to actually be in the zone. So to be able to embed themselves into the problem and not get distracted by having to go to a meeting. And because we have all the data, like we could look at like their media schedule, we could look at all their emails and how often they went to chat tools and whatever. And we started correlating that productivity is directly related to how many context switches you have each day. So this comes back to this chart, of course, but we wouldn't really have to do that research because this was all figured out already, what is it, 40 years ago. So try to avoid distractions in your life and you will become more successful. So now we're back to today. So we started in 43, 77, and now we're in 2021. And this slide is by Daniel Abrahams. He posted this on LinkedIn. So Daniel is a software developer from Sydney, and he likes to talk about marketing, leadership, and positivity. So I'm a positive person in mind as well, so I really like his insights. That's why I follow him. And this is an intriguing one as well, right? So you can measure your success. I mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs before. So are you focusing on the right thing? Are you really interested in, like 50% of your efforts are spent in house and money? So this is like, is this really what defines you? The other half is status, like scars, fame. And so are you really, is this really what you want to achieve? Or are you going for fulfillment? So this is something that should motivate you. And I'm not saying that all these other parts are not important. I mean, it is important to get stability in your life. But if you want to become happy, then you have to constantly refresh your mind and look at these things. Okay, so that's the premise. Now, how do we get there? How do you become a happy developer, right? Now, I make it sound so easy and say like, yeah, just think about it more often. And so I came up with 4 ways to actually structure this. So these are my proposed 4 solutions. So the first one, we focus first on your personal productivity, and then we'll focus on team productivity. So the first, the personal one has to do with personal productivity. I call that FREE. So this is an acronym for 4 attributes that you have to think about. The facts are how you communicate with other people. So this is still on the personal level. And then on the team level, which is the other dimension, we talk about MAP. So this is about team engagement, and PROMO, which is about team productivity. So these 2 things are conflicting. You can only think about this area in the top right if you got that area in the bottom left covered. So first look at FREE. So this is one of the 4 frameworks. This came out of a publication that I read from HBR. So if you think about, worry about productivity or about personal achievements, this is very often where you end up in the publication of the Harvard Business Review. And this article didn't mention this acronym FREE, but I just captured this. I thought it was easier to remember. So personal productivity is FREE, that sounds good, right? So what does the F stand for? So F stands for focus. So this means that as an individual, you can only become productive, like we're still talking about productivity here, if you work on the highest priority things. So this means focus, right? So you focus on the right thing. If you're really working hard and you're very effective in execution and you're delivering off the scale, but you're working on the wrong things, then your stakeholders will not really be impressed, because they will say like, get some focus and develop on the right things, right? So you got to work on the right things. Now, this is not easy as an individual, but how do you know what is the most important thing to work on? We have a backlog of 10,000 issues that we can work on. So we instituted things like Agile to come up with sprints so that we get this context of telling us as individuals what is the most important thing that we can work on. But this is also on a personal level. So yeah, this is about motivation. This is about watching videos, sitting on YouTube for hours, or is that really the thing you should work on at that moment in time? So you should reflect on, how am I spending my time? If your goal is to become really productive, right? I will assume that that's a goal here. Now, the second step in becoming a productive individual is to be results driven. So this means that anything you do in your life, so this includes work, but it's also personal life, before you start the activity, you should worry about like, what is the goal? Like, why am I doing this? And what do I intend to get out of it? So what is the outcome of my activity? So be results driven. So this is true for reading books. This is true for reading anything online. This is true for going to a meeting. So the next time you go to a meeting, a business meeting at work, look at it and say, is there an agenda? Like, why am I here? What kind of meeting is this actually? Is this a decision-making meeting? Is it an information sharing meeting? If it's a decision-making meeting, do I have all the information available to make a decision during the meeting? Am I actually involved in making that decision? So you can ask yourself all these questions to figure out what your role will be at this meeting. And this could be like a repeating meeting. It can also be like, I don't know, a yearly kickoff meeting. So it really depends on the type of meeting, what your contribution will be. But think about this, like before you start the meeting, is there an agenda? If there's not an agenda, ask the organizer, assuming there is an organizer, that's another point, right? Who owns the meeting, who drives it? So this is something as an individual you can think about. So be results driven in anything you do, even coding, like before you pick up a coding exercise, you're going to write something, figure out why are you doing this? Well, what is the outcome of this? This is fixing a bug, like what is the bug report? Do you have all the information? If this is a feature request, is this the important feature? Like, so think about all these activities. So you have to work on the right things. You also have to like align yourself with the right goals. Otherwise you just keep searching around and you can't read all the materials that they send to you. You can't read all the emails. So you got to be selective in what you actually consume. And the third part is once you decide on important things and you actually are exercising the right direction in that activity, then you have to learn how to become more efficient at it. So this means as software developers that we are, this means like study the tools that you use. So if your company is using Git for workflow, become a Git expert. If you are a Java developer, if you are a Python developer, study the language, like really study it, like figure out how the JVM works. I've interviewed many Java developers in technical companies that had like 12 years of Java experience. And I asked them, like, explain to me how the Java virtual machine works. And they couldn't start, like they had no idea. This is like, and I said, like, well, if you are really a Java developer, if you claim to be one, this is the label you put on yourself. This is like your skill. You should know how the execution environment runs. Like you should know how to influence performance in this environment. If you can't explain to me how this works, then you're not an expert at it. So this is part of your ability to become an efficient executor. This also means like do something like inbox zero. So don't read all these emails. Like I remember working for Dave Thomas at OTI at some point, and we came back from 2 weeks of vacation in Christmas time, and I said like, oh boy, now I have to read all these emails. And he said, no. I said, what do you mean no? No, I just go in and I do Control A and Control delete, delete all these emails. I said, but what if there are really important emails in there? Oh, they will send them again. So this is how you can deal with this kind of overload of information, right? It's all up to you how you deal with this stress. So the final one, this is really hard for typical software developers because we tend to be introverted. We tend to be focusing on technical problems. A lot of us are on on the autistic spectrum where it's hard for us to interact with other people. Now, if you want to be really productive, like a person that is exceptional compared to others, I talked about stakeholders before. So these are people that evaluate you, and they will look at your actions and your activities and compare them to what they expected from you. This means you have to develop empathy. You have to understand how other people think about you and how your actions influence other people. And this is a skill. You can actually pick this up. You can read a book about this. This is not so hard to learn. You start first with how to understand yourself. So this means like naming your emotions, figuring out like I'm grumpy today. If this, just rather than being grumpy and reacting to other people, tell yourself you're grumpy. And then you will automatically ask yourself, like, why am I grumpy? And then you start naming your emotions and then deriving the root cause for it. And this will define for you sort of the algorithm to actually fix it. So this is how you can deal with your own emotions and control them better. And once you get an expert at that, you can start seeing your behaviors reflecting other people's emotions as well. So now you know how to actually change other people's emotion. So I'm not trivializing this. I'm not saying that this is easy, but this is actually a learnable skill. Okay, so that was the first one. The second one is about communication. So as a software developer, we communicate a lot. Like I mentioned that research at Google, where we spend 30% of our time coding, the other 70% talking about our code. This means you have to become productive as an individual, you have to learn how to communicate with others. And that starts with facts. So this one is actually introduced by myself. So this is one of my 4 thought frameworks. The other 3 are borrowed from somewhere else. So it starts with facts. So as an engineer, you communicate with facts first and emotions second. I don't know if you noticed, it was very subtle, but in the introduction, I used a lot of facts. I referred to research. I referred to numbers. I give you pie charts. I give you, so what I tried to do there is very subtle, is to give you facts. So they make it easier for you to believe my problem statement, or to, rather than rely on my opinion, you actually can try to do the same exercise and look at these facts and then make the same decision with me. So as engineers, we have to almost learn this. Like we often say, well, I think we should use this other IDE because it looks cool. That's not a really convincing argument for somebody in business, right? They want to hear, if we switch to this new IDE, this will reduce our development time from 7 days to 5 days. This equates to time save this leads to 20 million savings, whatever, right? So are you able to correlate feelings and intuition into actual numbers and money? Also consider the alternatives. So you have to be transparent in your communication. So this means you trade off alternatives. You look at different things, different solutions. So there are different ways of solving the same thing, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. And a good decision maker is not a person that makes the right decisions. A good decision maker, which you are if you're communicating as an engineer, you're also explaining your decisions, is you show them what alternatives you considered. And this will make it a lot easier for people to accept your statements. Of course, you have to be consistent in your information. If you constantly say different things, then people will start worrying about like, yeah, the message is changing all the time. You have to be a tour guide, I call this. So you have to be positive. You have to show them the road to a positive outcome. Often as engineers, we forgot to do this in our communication. We focus on problems, right? We focus a lot on technical challenges. We focus less on how beautiful life will be once we get there. And we're all looking for this. So be positive, emphasize the good things, deliver the roadmap. So this means like 6 months from now, this awesome state that we will be in will be driven by these technical deliverables. And then finally, specific. So this means that you should not start any sentences with I think, or maybe, or have we considered. But rather than doing that, you know all the facts, right? You started with facts, so you have done your research and you've looked at the alternatives. So by the time you come to delivering your viewpoints on the world, you are the expert. So introduce yourself as the expert. This means that you have to develop a brand. And this is hard for engineers as well, but you have to think about like, how do other people see me? So everything you say can hurt your brand. So be careful about what you say. So make yourself an expert in the topic that you are chosen. You can be a tea engineer where you have a really broad experience and you focus on something very specific. But be an expert in something like, and you can make that by studying facts and showing all the alternatives. So that is on a personal level. On a team level, we focus more on like how do we communicate and collaborate with other people. So this book by Daniel Pink is all about like what motivates us as individuals, but also what motivates a team. So how do you make a team that is most productive and effective? And there's a lot of overlap, of course, with individual productivity, but there's a subtle difference as well. So the first area is called mastery. And this is all about like to motivate a team, you have to give them the ability to grow, right? Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where at the top you achieve fulfillment. There was an area called growth. And this means that the environment that you're in a really successful team or a motivating environment should allow you to go to conferences. Now you are at this conference, so that is already a checkbox. But it also, there's other ways of mastery. You can read magazines, you can read books, you can have internal conferences, internal courses. You can like attend webinars. But there are other solutions that I've not seen all companies use, which the ability, like take a break from your current team and go work with a sister team, or in the case you're delivering like infrastructure solutions, go work with one of your customers for a while. Like it's harder in COVID, but I used to say like take a trip to where that team sits and embed yourself in that team. So the concept of embedding is key to understanding and develop a mastery of the products you're actually delivering. Create the environment for fixed time for hacking and innovation. That's another aspect of mastery. So this is why Google introduced like the 20% time to allow you to work on side projects. So even if you're stuck in a project where you can't really grow to the maximum that you want to achieve, you have the freedom to actually find your own time to hack on things or create innovative solutions for things that you care about. So that's mastery. The other part is autonomy. So this means that you have flexible work hours. There's no micromanagement. Nobody measures your time you spend behind your computer. You have self-organizing teams. This means that we are aware of the problems that we want to solve as an organization, but the teams we put together is based on individual interests and how you can work with other teams. This allows you to, like autonomy also is about choosing your own favorite tasks. So during sprint time, and this is really key as an individual, you should prepare for this. You should know like what is all possible work out there and what do I like to work on. And you go to sprint time before that, you have studied this, you did your work so that you can actually pick the tasks that you like. If you don't spend any time at this, you will end up with all the work that's left over because all the other people pick the things they want to work on that they like. And this is also about task shifting. So maybe you're a backend engineer and your team also has an easy front-end task. And you say like, I want to work on that for a while. I can just figure out like how that works. So this is all about autonomy. This is empowering you to fill in your schedule in the same way that you like to spend your time. And for some people, this is working in the morning. Other people, they like working at night. They like to take long breaks in the middle. Like, who cares, right? So autonomy also assumes that the environment protects you from any bad things happening when you push to production, for instance. So motivating environments have high level of DevOps. So that means that the system will run a lot of tests and make sure that you don't break the integrity of the environment by making your changes. And then the third area is purpose. So this is still Daniel Pink's list of motivations. So what motivates the team? So the purpose means that we all know why we are here. So we know what goes into the system. We all contribute to the design. We know how far we are on the roadmap. So this means that we have progress, we have metrics, we have logs. We don't just do sprint planning, but we also do sprint review, where we look in the past and we said, like, how did it go last time? And what are the good things about the last cycle and not so good things? And can we improve? And all these are examples of showing us what the purpose is of our team, of our existence in this organization. It also means that we should celebrate success. We should all know the user stories, like how are people using our environment or our tools or our solutions. It means like contribution to open source. It means like that we have a vision. I love to do this exercise with teams there where I give everybody a sheet of paper and I tell them, write down the mission statement for our team. And you will be surprised how many different mission statements you will end up with. And then you compare them all, and we ask people to defend this mission statement. And this is really important as an exercise to figure out, are we on the same mission? Do we share the same vision for our team? Why it is important? And set goals. And this is on a personal level, but this is also on the team level. This is why OKRs are so key to giving us this context, this foundation of knowing why we are at the company, how the company makes money, what our team does, and what you do to deliver value to that proposition. And then the final one is number 4 is background from studies done by IBM. They looked at 200 different teams and they wanted to isolate the facts that make these teams successful. Now there's really small letters, so you can't read the words anymore, but there's also an acronym in there, and I thought it was really hard to say, so I just gave it a new acronym. I called it PROMO. First one is the same. It's also P for psychological safety. So this assumes that any successful team, individuals in that team are safe. So this means that they have the safety to experiment, to have different thoughts, to try different things, to come up with dissenting opinions. So this is all about psychological safety. Individuals are free to take risks. But also very important is that these teams are not hiding mistakes. They actually openly talk about mistakes that they make as a team. They actually like making mistakes because they learn from this. So this means that there's a high developed culture for blameless retrospectives, for instance. So I mentioned sprint review before, but this is also when an outage happens or an incident happens in production. So rather than trying to find out who was the reason for this outage and fire them, we figure out how did the system allow them to actually break production, and how can we as a team fix that in the future so that this doesn't happen again. So this means that you focus on mistakes in a positive sense. So it's nobody's fault, right? It's the fault of the system. And I tried to do this in my onboarding with JP Morgan. I wanted to test and see like how much psychological safety is there in this team that I'm joining. And I gave, like every time I met somebody, I gave them 3 questions. So give me the good things about the platform and tell me 3 bad things about the platform. And then tell me 3 things that you think I should do as developer advocate to make you really happy in about half a year. So I hid the 3 negative things in the middle, right? So I let them talk about positive things, and then I put this negative part in the middle, and then I talk about positive things again. because I wanted to see how openly they could talk about negative things about the system. And if they were finding it possible to actually discuss them and constructively find solutions to go there. So this is a key attribute of, and they all talked about it, so that's the good news. So this is an attribute of successful teams. Are you able to talk about your mistakes? Are you able to take risks? Now, the second thing, this is, almost self-defining definition, right? So recursive definition. Successful teams actually deliver. So this means on an individual level that you can rely on somebody doing what they promised to do. And that's a high bar of excellence. So this comes back to sprint planning again. Like in sprint planning, you often want to figure out like, what can we do this week as a team? And there's so many tasks that you can pick up, and then we have to do sizing. And this is the really hard one, right? So they're going to ask you like, all right, Chris, this ticket, you're the person that's the best one for this one this week. So how long do you think it will take you? And it could be an hour, it could be a day, it could be 3 days, I don't know. So this comes back to being an expert in your communication, right? You have to know, like you prepared for sprint planning, so you saw this ticket, you're not going to make this statement on the fly. You already predicted that, this thing is going to end up in my court, and I can make a meaningful estimate here. Now, the estimate can be completely wrong, but you will get better over time. And as a team, this is also very important, because otherwise, if the individuals can't estimate and deliver on time, then this will hurt the ability of the team to do it similarly. And this will hurt your reputation as a team. So this comes back to successful teams and collaboration. So the impacts of individuals have a big impact on the rest of the team. The third one I call obvious. So this means clarity and structure. So this means, going back to earlier ones, you know the purpose of the team. You know why the company is there. This is why we have roles in a team. This is why we have clear definitions. It must be trivial for you to find out who is on your team and what are the individuals working on. It must be trivial to you to find out who are your stakeholders and look at their teams. So this is why companies should invest in tools that let you explore the organizational structure of your company. You should also have like top-down and bottom-up mission statements. And we often capture this in things called OKRs, objectives and key results. And they're very useful for this particular part. So to make it obvious for you why your team is there. And you should like get into the mode of doing all your work. Like I talked about, like personal productivity, right? Figuring out why are you working on something. This is where this comes back. So if you're coding in a bug, this goes into a sprint and there's a ticket for this opened by a customer, and you link to that information. If it's a new feature, then this comes back to a new feature that we're delivering as a team. This is part of our KR to get to that beautiful place that we wanted to go to. But it should be easy for you, for anybody, for stakeholders, to correlate what you're doing to why are you doing this. And then M is meaning. So this is about purpose that we talked about earlier. But this is also on a personal level. So in a successful team, people know why they're there on the team, what they do. They're proud to be part of this team. They're really excited. They talk about this in public channels as well, like on Twitter or on Reddit or Stack Overflow, whatever. They find meaning in their existence in the team. And then the final thing is that successful teams focus on the outcome. They feel like they actually create change. This is an inspirational, like you don't want to work on a team that is just doing menial things, right? Or toil or just keeping the lights on. This is not inspiring. This is not equating. People don't equate that activity to success. There's also a conundrum because often we don't spend that much money into keeping the lights on, or we don't care about this as much. And as an organization, we should put the right incentives in place to also worry about this. So we should be very self-aware as organizations that we don't measure success in the wrong way. Okay, so those are the 4 frameworks. I will finish up with, I'm running out of time, I'm seeing, with really quick overviews of 5 things where this comes back. So you will see that it's actually concrete. So 10x developer, what is that? So a 10x developer is a person who can do 10 times as much in the same time as any other normal developer. So where do you think that person sits in this set of things? They could be very personal productive, like, yeah, that's in the definition, right? They're 10 times as productive as others. Maybe they communicate better, like they're not really 10 times productive, but they make it look like they are. But really, I think if you look at the real 10x developer, that they are individuals that can empower their team. So if you're on a team of 10 people, it's better to make the other 9 people do all the things that you would normally do, because that allows you to focus on other things. So we should focus more on collaboration, on making our team successful, making other people happy. So first of 5 is about code review, about conflicts. So conflicts are a situation where we communicate with other individuals. This could be about technical things, but it can also be a product vision or politics. It doesn't matter. And we often think that conflicts are bad, but the good. This is actually part of psychological safety. We want other opinions. We want to compare them, because we all have tunnel vision, right? We have biases in our lives. We have confirmation bias, and without people correcting that, we all may be doing the wrong thing. So conflicts are great. So assuming that we are in a conflict situation, there are 2 ways of approaching it. Like, you can see it as you win or you lose, or they win and they lose. So let's look at these dimensions. So we could both recognize there's a conflict, but we both walk away. So we escape. Then we basically both lose. Like, the organization as a whole loses, because the good thoughts that we had are not recognized. We might say, like, no, I'm going to win this one. I care about this, and I'm actually going to fight for my opinion, and you win. The other person loses, right? So this is not good either. The opposite one, of course, is that they fight and you lose. Or you could say, like, well, I don't really like the fight. Conflict. I don't like conflicts. And you just ask your manager to make a decision. So this is escalation. So you say, rather than say, like, we come up with a solution, you ask somebody else to take a decision. What you end up often with is something that you both lose. So it's not much better than escaping the situation. This is when you go to court, right? The famous television courts where you have 2 people and then the judge take a decision where they both like, what? So this is what you don't want either. So the best thing you can probably do is get a compromise. So, like, yeah, I really want to do this, but you want to do that. And so if we do something in the middle, then we're both happy, right? But you also you didn't achieve what we're really going for, which is consensus. So how do you get to consensus? Is by focusing on the problem. So then never, ever, ever focus on the person. So don't start sentences with you always, or because you, or whatever. Don't focus on the individual. Don't focus on their attributes, but focus on the problem. Like, maybe it's their actions that caused this conflict. Then focus on what they did and how it influenced the environment around them, and explain to them that if they do something else, then their actions will have different impact on the environment. So come up with solutions. You have to work on this. You have to understand the problem. You have to understand how other people think. This comes back to emotional intelligence and empathy. And you have to be self-aware. So you may be really annoyed with this other person, and you have to ask yourself, why am I annoyed? Well, because they always show up late to the meetings. So why is that a problem? Because they, and then you start explaining this to the other individual, and this conflict disappears because you don't have a conflict with the individual, but then more about the problem, and they understand it better. So don't fight, don't escape, but achieve consensus. I mentioned OKRs before, and a lot of people are confused about OKRs. What are they? So this is all you need to remember about OKRs. So OKRs are ambitious, business, and qualitative. So this is a dream. So the green part is you want to be in this dream state. This is like you're a market leader, or you're like the best thing. So this is something you can't put a number to. But it's hard to get progress, right? We want to get progress to our goals, and we want to see. So our objective could be, I want to be really healthy. Now my key results could be is like, I want to lose weight. So just saying losing weight is not enough. It is a quantitative thing. You could say like, I want to lose 30 pounds. Now all of a sudden this is measurable. You can go on a weight scale every day and you can see like, but it's even better if you put a time bound on this. So you say like, I want to lose 30 pounds this year, because now you can cut it down to individual parts. And losing weight is one way to get healthy, but you can also say like, I'm going to exercise more, or I'm going to eat better. So these are all different KRs that lead to this dream thing, which is becoming more healthy. And this is how you structure OKRs. How much time do we have, Charles? I lost 10.
Strictly 4 more minutes.
4 more minutes. Okay, I'll go really fast on this one. So giving feedback is hard as well for software developers. This is about communication, this collaboration, right? So this is not worrying about our own personal productivity, but it's worrying about other people's productivity as well. So how do you guide them in the right way? This is not easy. This is conflict situations as well. So the easy ones, so giving a feedback where it's easy versus hard, is just giving typo corrections in a code review. This is easy, right? For us, we see something wrong, we just correct it. It's both constructive, but it's also very easy. What is easy and positive is complimenting a colleague at stand-up. I mentioned celebrating success. You should do this. 90% of your time, you should compliment other people. Like just tell them they did an awesome job and tell them why. So be concrete in your feedback as well. People will like you, but they also will be happier. And surprisingly, you will get happy as well. Like by giving compliments, you become a lot happier. What is both positive and hard is to give performance review. So the word review means that, yeah, this is like a formal way of describing how people did these things. You can structure this really well. You can be tactful in your feedback giving. You can be factual. You can be balanced. You can make sure that they actually received it. You can focus on strengths. You can make the feedback that you're giving actionable, so they can actually go to this roadmap, right? This positive direction that I mentioned of your personal communication techniques. And they should be timely. So don't tell them like this meeting in March where you did that was really bad. Because now it's December, like what can I do about that, right? So you should tell me right away. And the same thing about receiving feedback. So don't be defensive, but see it as a present that other people give you. So that's about feedback. And the hardest thing is creating the environment. I said earlier when I started, I said like, I talked about London, right? This environment where you can only be productive biking around if the bicycle tracks are there. So how can I ensure as an individual that there are bicycle tracks in London? That's impossible, right? And this is the same environment that you're in a company. Like we're using the wrong tools for doing software development lifecycle. There's no way I can change this. I just got to live around. So try not to take anything for granted and use your factual driven communication techniques to ensure that the company changes around. Now this area, I will just go really fast. This is about code reviews, which is about communication techniques. Like you can be very lawful, which means like you worry about obedience to authority. You can be really chaotic, but we want to be at the top right. Communication, this is really about selling. Like all engineers are selling all the time. Like I'm selling you something today. Like if you look back at this presentation, I had an intro, I introduced myself, I described the problem, and I had a solution, and I finish up with an ask. This is how every single communication should be structured. So you as an individual, when you do a presentation like this, follow this particular elevator speech structure. You have a little bit more time than these seconds, but I finish off with the ask because that's part of that story. So you should invest in your personal productivity and communication skills, because if you do that, then you can maximize your team success. And therefore you can increase the impact that your team has in your organization, but also your personal impact. And that will make you happy. Like coming back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you will become happy if you can make other people happy. This is more important than going for your personal success, is to go for team success. And if you want to learn more about this, you can check out some of my blogs and books, and you can find them at my personal website. So with that, I want to thank you for listening in.